It was supposed to be just another primetime panel, a calm exchange of visions between two powerful women. But from the moment the cameras rolled, the tension between Vice President Kamala Harris and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sizzled beneath the surface like a fuse waiting to blow. The studio lights beamed down on the polished set of American Crossroads, where polished decorum often cloaked the raw battles of power and principle. Jasmine, seated in a royal blue suit that matched the calm before the storm, was mid-sentence, discussing the erosion of trust in leadership, when Kamala interrupted. A smirk curled on Kamala's lips. "It's funny," she said with deceptive sweetness, "some people preach authenticity, but the lives they live behind closed doors? Completely manufactured. Almost contractual." The air shifted. Everyone in the room knew who she was talking about. Jasmine blinked slowly, lips tightening, not in confusion, but in measured restraint. Kamala didn't stop. "I mean, let's be honest," she continued, glancing toward the producers as if she were just keeping it real. "Some marriages are more political strategies than love stories." Gasps rippled off camera. One of the producers mouthed, "Did she just?" But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't ask for clarification. She didn't even look at Kamala. Instead, she leaned forward, eyes locked on the camera. "What you're watching right now," Jasmine began in a voice calm enough to cut glass, "isn't a conversation, it's a performance. And when people feel threatened, they perform." She paused. "My marriage doesn't need a spotlight. But if you want to talk about who's pretending, trust me, this country will find out real fast who's been reading from a script their whole career." The silence was volcanic. Kamala blinked, not expecting the blowback to come so fast or so precise. The moderator tried to cut to commercial. He couldn't. Because the nation was already glued to what was happening live. Kamala shifted in her seat, visibly rattled. For someone who'd mastered the art of staying poised under pressure, the sting of Jasmine's comeback left a mark. The vice president attempted to recenter herself with a quick sip of water, but the tremble in her fingers betrayed her. Jasmine didn't look away. The moderator cleared his throat, desperate to steer the segment back to safer waters. "Ladies, perhaps we can refocus on the topic at hand, trust in American institutions." But neither woman was letting this moment pass. "Oh, we're talking about trust," Jasmine said, her voice rising with steady conviction. "Then maybe we should talk about what it looks like when the highest offices in the land treat truth like it's optional." Kamala's eyebrow arched. "Are you suggesting I'm not being truthful?" Jasmine smiled. "Not the friendly kind, the kind that comes right before a storm. I'm saying when you imply that my relationship is fake, you're not just lying, you're projecting," Jasmine replied. "Because real relationships aren't built for optics. They're not rehearsed. And they sure as hell aren't trotted out for applause when approval ratings dip." The audience in the studio gasped again. A producer in the control room muttered, "Oh my God, this is blowing up already." Twitter was catching fire. Hashtags like hashtag Kamala vs. Jasmine and hashtag contract marriage trended in real time. Kamala attempted to pivot. "It's unfortunate you think criticism means someone is threatened." But Jasmine was locked in. "It's not criticism when you weaponize whispers and disguise them as questions. That's cowardice, not leadership." The moderator's eyes darted toward the floor manager. "Do we go to break?" he whispered. "No," the manager shot back. "We'd lose the country." And they would. Across the U.S., phones lit up, notifications buzzed, and millions watched Jasmine Crockett hold her ground like a pillar of unshakable steel. She wasn't just defending her life, she was exposing the game. And Kamala? She had walked right into a firestorm she thought she could control. But control had just switched hands. The silence in the studio was no longer uncomfortable, it was electric. Kamala sat forward, trying to reassert control. "I'm not going to entertain conspiracy theories about my motives," she said, her tone firm but measured. "This conversation was about transparency, and it's unfortunate that it's turned personal." Jasmine didn't blink. She leaned in, her voice calm but sharp. "No, Madam Vice President, what's unfortunate is when a woman at the top uses the language of rumor to undermine another woman's integrity, especially when that woman happens to be married, stable, and not seeking validation through tabloid spin. Kamala opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Chris Hayes, who'd remained unusually quiet, finally interjected. "This isn't just a political moment anymore. This is personal. Jasmine, do you feel targeted?" Jasmine inhaled deeply. "Absolutely. But I also know I'm not the first. Powerful black women, whether in Congress or at the corner of 125th and Lenox, have had to defend their character simply for existing. I've been in rooms where men doubted my credentials. I didn't expect it from her." Her eyes flicked back to Kamala. The tension between them could slice through concrete. And then it happened. Jasmine reached into her jacket pocket and slowly pulled out a folded piece of paper. The camera zoomed in instinctively. She unfolded it and placed it on the table. "This," she said, "is a copy of our marriage license. Filed, verified, dated. Not that I owe it to anyone. But when power tries to mock truth with innuendo, I prefer receipts." The room exploded. Gasps. Whispers. One producer cursed out loud. Kamala's eyes locked on the paper, then back to Jasmine, but the damage was done. Chris Hayes leaned forward. "You came prepared." Jasmine nodded. "Because I knew this wasn't about policy. This was about power plays and projection. And I don't play." Kamala exhaled through her nose, her jaw set. But she didn't speak. For the first time in her political career, she was witnessing a moment she couldn't spin. Jasmine had just changed the rules. The cameras didn't dare cut away. Kamala Harris sat still, her expression unreadable, but her fingers tightened slightly around her pen. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just responded, she'd detonated. And now, everyone in the room, including the vice president, could feel it. The momentum had shifted. Chris Hayes tried to bring some order back. "Congresswoman Crockett, are you implying that personal attacks like this are becoming normalized in politics, especially toward women of color?" Jasmine nodded without hesitation. "It's not just being normalized, Chris. It's being institutionalized. People aren't whispering anymore, they're putting it in headlines, feeding it into algorithms. They know exactly what they're doing." She turned, locking eyes with Kamala. "And when it comes from someone who's worn the mantle of representation, it's not just disappointing. It's dangerous." Kamala leaned forward now, lips pressed into a tight line. "I didn't question your integrity, Congresswoman. I posed a question that others were already asking." Jasmine didn't even blink. "You mean you amplified it? Live? In front of millions? That was it? No yelling? No raised voices? Just precision?" Kamala's political instincts kicked in, she tried pivoting to talking points. "Let's be clear about what's at stake. The American people are tired of drama. They want results. They want unity." But Jasmine was already ahead of her. "Unity doesn't come from passive-aggressive shots and veiled jabs. It comes from respect. And if you want people to trust you, Madam Vice President, you start by not throwing other women under the bus when the cameras are rolling." The studio was frozen. Even the crew, usually indifferent, stood still. No one dared move. Chris Hayes slowly glanced at the teleprompter. He was supposed to transition into foreign policy. But how could he, when the two most powerful black women in American politics were locked in a real-time reckoning? Kamala looked down. Her political polish intact, but her control slipping. Jasmine sat back in her seat, her shoulders relaxed, her eyes focused forward. She didn't come here to survive the segment. She came to end a narrative. Chris Hayes cleared his throat, unsure whether to cut to break or let it unfold. But Jasmine wasn't finished, not even close. "You know what's wild," she said, her tone casual but cutting. "They say I'm too bold, too direct, too much. But what's really too much is the silence when women are painted as political props. Especially by other women who should know better." Kamala raised a brow. "Congresswoman, if you think my questions were about diminishing you. Oh no, Jasmine interrupted. I don't think anything. I watched it happen in real time. You didn't question my policies. You questioned my marriage, on live television. You played into the same garbage narratives Republicans throw at women every election cycle. The audience, previously a polite blur, was suddenly real. Someone in the third row gasped. Another shook their head. One woman mouthed, "Wow." Kamala leaned back, visibly recalculating. But Jasmine wasn't attacking. She was dissecting. You said, some say her relationship is for optics. What you didn't say is that it's a lie. That it's an insult. That it's beneath someone in your position to entertain such trash. You left that door open, Kamala. You wanted people to walk through it. Kamala's voice lowered. I asked what voters were already hearing. Then maybe, Jasmine snapped, you should have said what they should be hearing instead. Dead silence. Chris Hayes stepped in, gently. We'll be right back after this, Bree. No, Chris, Jasmine cut in. Let me finish this. She turned to the camera, not Kamala, not the host. The audience at home. To every woman watching this who's ever had her worth questioned, her love labeled a lie, or her voice silenced, I see you. And you don't need a title or a spotlight to prove you matter. But if you do have one, you damn sure better use it to lift, not diminish. Even Kamala couldn't hide it now, the tension in her jaw, the blink she held too long. This wasn't a feud. It was a reckoning. Kamala adjusted her mic. Her voice, calm and measured, sliced through the tension. Congresswoman Crockett, I respect your passion. But sometimes passion clouds judgment. I was asking questions because the public deserves transparency. That's leadership. Jasmine didn't flinch. If leadership means validating gossip with a smile, then we need to redefine it. Chris Hayes leaned in, sensing the moment could erupt again. But Jasmine was in full control, no yelling, no theatrics, just piercing clarity. Let me ask you something, Kamala, she said. If a man questioned your marriage on live TV, what would you call that? Kamala hesitated. I'll tell you, Jasmine continued. You'd call it sexist. You'd call it invasive. And you'd be right. So why is it different when it's woman on woman, mic on mic, prime time? Now Chris knew better than to interrupt. Jasmine pressed on. You think because you didn't say the words, you didn't start the fire. But implication is currency in politics, and you spent it recklessly. Kamala's eyes narrowed. Her voice sharpened. I've faced decades of scrutiny. I know what implication feels like. Then you should have known better, Jasmine fired back. Because what you did tonight wasn't just about me, it was about sending a signal. That the second a black woman climbs too high, even another black woman might try to pull her back down. And I refuse to be part of that performance. The audience shifted. Murmurs grew louder. One young man in the front row clapped once, loud, abrupt. Then silence again. Jasmine exhaled. You asked if my marriage was for optics. I say this, my life is not a campaign strategy. My love is not a photo op. And if you need to question something tonight, question why we're still weaponizing intimacy to score political points. Kamala's face froze. Not out of anger, but out of something rarer in Washington, reflection. Chris turned to the camera. We'll be right back, but something just changed here. Something had. The game had shifted. And Jasmine wasn't playing anymore, she was rewriting the rules. The commercial break finally came. But the energy on set didn't cool, it simmered. Kamala stood by her chair, eyes locked on the floor, scrolling something on her phone. Chris Hayes leaned in to whisper to the producer. The stagehands avoided eye contact. Only Jasmine stayed still, hands clasped, composed, staring straight ahead like she'd already said everything she came to say. The countdown hit 5. Then the lights flared back on. The music faded. And just like that, they were live again. Chris opened, "Careful now, we're back with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Vice President Harris." Before the break, a powerful exchange. "Jasmine, you were making a point." Jasmine cut in, calmly. "I made it. But now I've got a question for Kamala." Kamala didn't respond immediately. She glanced once at Chris, then nodded. "Go ahead." Jasmine didn't waste time. "Why now?" she asked. "Why bring up rumors now, on this stage, at this moment, when women's rights are under siege, when our democracy is hanging by threads, when black women are carrying the weight of political mobilization across the country?" Kamala blinked. "I didn't bring up the rumors. I referenced public discourse." Jasmine tilted her head. "No, Kamala. You gave it oxygen. You used your platform to hint at scandal instead of substance. You could have talked about healthcare. About abortion bans. About gun violence. But instead, you dangled a whisper, and expected me to thank you for the mic time." The audience, once again, sat dead silent. Chris shifted in his chair. This was not the interview he expected, but it was the one America couldn't stop watching. Kamala tried to pivot. "This isn't personal." "It is when you use my name," Jasmine said, voice unwavering. "And it's political when you do it with cameras rolling." She leaned forward. "Here's the truth, since everyone's afraid to say it out loud, when powerful women get too close to truth, someone always tries to make them explain their personal lives. But I'm not apologizing for being visible. Or for being loved." That landed like a thunderclap. Kamala opened her mouth. But closed it again. Chris Hayes looked between them, then said quietly, "We'll continue this discussion after the break." But even a break couldn't stop what had just cracked open. They returned from commercial, but no one was really ready. The air was different now, heavier. Not angry, not chaotic, just undeniable. Chris tried to reclaim control. "Let's widen the lens," he said, almost pleading. "Let's talk about trust, about what the American public sees when our leaders turn on each other. Don't we risk feeding the very cynicism we say we're fighting?" Kamala leaned in. "That's a fair point. But transparency isn't betrayal. We hold each other accountable not just to defend democracy, but to elevate it." Jasmine didn't blink. "Accountability doesn't start with gossip." Chris hesitated. "Then what does it start with?" "Courage," Jasmine said. "The kind that speaks hard truths when they're inconvenient, not just when they're performative. And if I may," she looked to Kamala, "we need to stop confusing proximity to power with moral clarity." Kamala didn't speak. The silence lingered, echoing louder than any retort could. Jasmine continued. "I'm not here to drag another woman of color on television. That's not what I do. But I won't let my name, or my marriage, become props in someone else's redemption arc." Kamala finally looked up. Her eyes were tired. Not defeated, but exposed. Jasmine softened, slightly. "We've both fought for people who never got a mic. We've both stood in rooms where no one wanted us there. But when we stand on these stages, we don't just represent our ambition, we represent their hope. And I won't let that be tainted by innuendo." Chris sat back. He knew what was happening now wasn't television. It was truth in real time. Kamala cleared her throat. "I didn't mean harm. And I didn't take offense," Jasmine replied. "I took action." The audience didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just watched, spellbound. Because something real was happening. Something raw. Unscripted. Human. Chris ended the segment. "We'll be right back." But the viewers didn't move. Neither did Jasmine. In that moment, without yelling or grandstanding, she'd done what so few ever do on live television. She made silence louder than applause. The show ended. The cameras cut. But the moment? It kept breathing. In the studio, producers scattered, whispering urgently into headsets. Assistants began packing up, but their eyes stayed fixed on Jasmine, who remained seated, calm, unshaken, dignified. Kamala stood silently nearby, one heel slightly tapping the studio floor, her arms folded tight across her chest like she was still processing what had just unfolded. Chris Hayes walked over slowly. "That wasn't what we planned," he said quietly, his voice low so only Jasmine could hear. "It never is," she replied, eyes still forward. But it was what needed to happen. The conversation backstage was no less charged. A group of young staffers, black, brown, white, were huddled near the coffee counter, whispering with a kind of stunned reverence. Someone said, "Did you see her face when Jasmine said, 'I took action'?" Another murmured, "That wasn't just a clapback. That was a reckoning." Meanwhile, the story had already detonated online. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine's response were exploding across X, Instagram, and TikTok. The hashtag Jasmine versus the Veep trended globally within 20 minutes. Commentators from all political angles were diving in, some accusing Kamala of internal sabotage, others praising Jasmine for standing her ground with restraint and clarity. But the ones that hit hardest weren't from politicians or pundits. They were from women. Black women, especially. One tweet read, "I've been Jasmine. In the room, at the table, still questioned. Tonight she didn't just defend herself, she defended all of us." Another said, "Kamala tried to play politics. Jasmine played truth." In a matter of hours, Jasmine's team was fielding requests from CNN, MSNBC, even The View. But Jasmine wasn't answering her phone. She wasn't celebrating. She was driving. Alone. Quiet. Not away from the moment, but toward what came next. Because while the world watched the explosion, she was already focused on the aftershock. The next morning, Capitol Hill was humming, not with policy talk, but with the aftermath of the moment that had cracked through every feed and every echo chamber overnight. Jasmine Crockett walked into the House chamber with quiet force. No entourage. No theatrics. Just presence. The kind that made even those who disagreed with her sit a little straighter when she passed. Reporters surged toward her in the hallway. "Congresswoman, any comment on Vice President Harris's remarks? Are you planning to respond officially? Was your marriage ever?" She stopped. Turned. And with that same unwavering look from the night before, she spoke. "I responded on live television," she said calmly. "The rest is noise." And just like that, she walked on. Inside, as the floor session began, her phone buzzed quietly in her blazer pocket. A message from her husband. Just one line. Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. Across town, in the West Wing, Kamala Harris sat with her comms team. The clip of Jasmine's words was being played and replayed in silence. She stared at the screen, not with anger, but with the weight of consequence. "She didn't come for your position," one aide offered. "She came for the truth." Kamala nodded slowly. And that's what made it land. Meanwhile, in living rooms across America, people who'd never heard Jasmine Crockett's name before were suddenly Googling her, quoting her, lifting her up. Not because she shouted. But because she stood still while the storm raged, and refused to be moved. That night, on MSNBC, Chris Hayes opened his monologue differently. Sometimes politics feels like performance. But every now and then, the curtain lifts, and we see something real. Last night was one of those moments. He paused, then added. And Jasmine Crockett reminded us all what integrity sounds like when it stops asking permission. And in a fractured America, for just one moment, the truth was louder than the smear. Sometimes the most powerful moments in politics don't come from shouting, but from silence that refuses to bend. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. When her character was questioned, when her marriage was dragged into the dirt, she didn't take the bait. She didn't flinch. She didn't fold. Instead, she answered with facts. With poise. With the kind of clarity that cuts deeper than any insult ever could. In that one moment, live on air, she didn't just defend herself, she spoke for every woman who's ever had to prove she's more than the rumors, more than the whispers, more than the games. And when the dust settled, it wasn't the lie that echoed. It was the truth. Because power isn't just who holds the mic. It's who knows when to speak, and makes the whole room listen.